morning, everyone. Good morning, sir. Today we have Rohan, sir, Rohan Rawat, sir, who is a Ph.D. scholar, who is Ph.D. psychology research scholar. He is also a visiting faculty at Amity Institute of Psychology and Allied Sciences, Amity University, Noida. He has also been an assistant educator, Action for Autism, National Center for Autism, India. He has done his training in numerous certified courses as well. First, highs and lows, clinical pearls and lessons learned in the outpatient management of geriatric bipolar disorders. He has also done a certificate course in COVID-19 and mental health, caring for the public and ourselves. He has been part of many researches and many of his researches even got published. He has also been part of many seminars and conferences. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Thank you so much, Tanya, for giving me an opportunity. And in fact, सबसे पहले तो namaste and a very good afternoon to everybody. And I would like to thanks Psychologs Magazine for providing me an opportunity to speak on men's mental health occasion. It will be a very interactive session. I hope that the session goes well and hoping that I am quite audible. Shall I start with the session?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fair enough. So I'll be sharing my screen, and before starting, I'll be doing a little poll, okay, with the audience so that it can be more interactive. This session can be more interactive. It is essential to understand the ground reality. It always starts from the ground reality. Okay, so besides discussing evidence-based fact or theoretical facts or practical things, the ground reality of the topics is very essential. So I'll be sharing my screen and directing you to a website, okay, so that you can easily. So I'll just let me know that whether my screen is visible or not. Okay, just okay. Is my
Yes,
screen
sir,
visible?
your screen is visible. Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, so hoping that this page is visible to you. Now, what I want is to go on menti.com. So yeah, everybody go on menti.com, menti.com, and type in the code 54247652. Okay, the instructions are given on the page itself. And just answer this question: what are the three biggest challenges that a man or a boy usually face in life? So we may get few responses from the participant. Okay, if you're a man or a boy, you can type in your challenges, three biggest challenges you face in life. And in case if you're a woman, then you can just type in the challenges men in your families usually face. So I would request everybody to participate in this poll. We have not got any responses. I hope I am audible and visible.
Yes, sir, you are audible. Maybe the audience is trying to do the
Yeah,
same.
it will take time. So basically, we'll try to get the ground reality over here, the challenges that men face. And if we got any data, then it's fine. If we didn't got any data, then no issues with that. We'll proceed as it is. Anyway, so without wasting any more time, so I guess we are not getting any data or any response, or audience may be shy in engaging. And this is actually the reality that is out there. See, few responses I have came across. One response is there: stress to become a bread earner. I suppose that's earner. And work life managing, relationship issues. These are few challenges. Financial support, two more responses are there. Family mental support is there. And ultimately, why the responses are quite slow? This is the biggest question, because these topics don't find any importance in today's society. Okay, and I will be discussing, taking up this point, supporting this point in few of the presentations above. So anyway, we have got two responses, that is quite fair enough. But yeah, these are some basic challenges that we face, and in the upcoming presentation, in the upcoming slides, I will be supporting few of these things with the data, and I will be giving you some examples also to support them. Anyway, so this is the ground reality. Financial support, stress to become a bread earner, of course, work life management, one of the biggest tasks after COVID-19, relationship issues, obviously, relationship issues, juggling between the relationships of my wife, relationships of myself, and in fact, the relationship with my friends, my teachers, my colleagues, and everybody. Family mental health is something which is very important, especially in India. Yeah. So, this is the basic idea. Moving on to the presentation, in case if you find any difficulty or you are not able to see the screen, just let me know. Okay. Yeah. So,
Yeah,
our
sir.
topic is counseling men, understanding treatment and prevention. Okay. In this session, we will try to define some important points first. It is important to keep some definition up to our sleeves so that things will become easier for us to understand in later time. Okay, we would learn about the area specific, what the psychology of men is actually known as. We will learn about that field, a little bit of history, and that history is very interesting. It is not like boring history having a lot of dates and everything. It is very interesting history. So I will tell you, and I will be showing you some data on Indian men. Okay, because we are dealing with uh, Indian society. Okay, we are specifically discussing our topics within the Indian society, and my major target audience would possibly be Indian men. Okay, so we will be discussing some data on Indian men, and then one example of a common issue that a man faces in his day-to-day life will also be discussed. Now, this is one issues among many other. There are many other issues, but I will give one example. And this is a model actually in a textbook. So I will be explaining you in a very easy way so that you can recall it later on easily. Well, and finally, we will try to understand the challenges the counselor face, okay, while counseling Indian men or while counseling men. Okay, these challenges are very important because as a counselor, as a psychologist, men are sometimes a difficult client. So there can be an easy client, there will be a difficult client. Men are mostly easy client, but they are easy. Men are generally a difficult client, but they heal faster. That is the reality. That is what the research data says. And then available treatments will also be discussed. Okay, there are certain approaches, there are certain psychotherapies that will also be discussed. This will be followed by some techniques that can help in preventing complex things from happening within men. All right, so without wasting any moment, let's get started. As I told you, first it is important to define gender and sex. I'm not telling you to understand it in a very, very technical form, but a very easy definitions are given in APA's Dictionary of Psychology. While sex is basically the physical and biological traits which are used to distinguish between male and female. All right, so these are physical and biological traits. So there are two aspects you can say, or one aspect also you can say, but majorly. So the issue of sex becomes a little less complex and more medical in nature. All right. But when we are dealing with gender, recently Facebook has released around 58 different genders options. I suppose I read an article somewhere. The, the reason being that gender is defined as uh, like gender is defined on the basis of four aspects. Okay, psychological aspect, behavioral aspect, social aspect, and cultural aspect. Okay, so how certain psychological, behavioral, social, and cultural aspect will define an individual into a male, and how these four aspects will define an individual into female. That is the agenda of gender. That is the main question of gender. All right. So the condition of being male, female, or neuter. I read this term neuter while I was young in English. So feminine gender, masculine gender, neuter gender. All right. But ultimately, the critical studies of gender has started, and there are much more complex combinations or intensity of these four aspects, resulting in different kind of situations. I won't say this a problem. There is nothing uh, a problem. There is no such thing as a problem, but a situation, okay, that we get. Having a positive approach in starting for a counselor is far more beneficial than any other approach. Okay, so now we have defined gender and sex. Let's move on. As I told you, the psychology of men, which we are dealing with, the field is actually known as psychology of men and masculinities. All right. Now, it is a broader study that how boys or men's life are connected with gender and sex. Okay. In overall, this is the definition of psychology of men and masculinities. Now, a whole journal, research journal of APA or American Psychological Association is dedicated to this field of study, and there is also a separate division in APA. So APA has different divisions dedicated to different fields of study. All right, there may be a counseling division, there may be a psychopharmacological division, there may be a family and counseling division also, and there is this division, psychology of men and masculinities, and it has a research journal as well. Okay, this is a very good research journals. Researchers from across the globe, good quality research gets published in this journal. It has an impact factor of 2, which is excellent. In today's world, it is excellent. And the editors are Liu and Wong. Okay, so they gave this definition. Now, reason why I have used this definition that uh, there are no other definition quite easily available over there. So there is no credible definition, I would tell you. So that's the reason why it is difficult to gather literature in such subjects. All right. Interestingly, the history of this whole subject area or this whole field is very much, you can say, related to the feminist psychology. All right. So when authors of a book, there is also a book with a similar name, Psychology of Men's and Masculinity, easily available on Amazon. I have used this book as a reference in most of the slides. Okay, so you can see that book. Now, when the author of that book, they approached their colleagues, they were the researchers actually. So when they approached their colleagues in APA that let's start a division, separate divisions of men's and masculinities in APA, a major question which they were backfired with was that why do we need that, and isn't all the psychology of men, and kind of like these were the questions. All right, but ultimately it all starts with women. I would say this thing initially because this view was challenged by feminist psychologists, psychology researchers and practitioners in 1970. So this is the talk of 1970, I'm telling you. Later, little after 1950s, mid 1900s. So 1970s early time, feminist psychologists began to challenge this idea that isn't all psychology the psychology of men, or isn't why do we need a psychology of men's and masculinities as well. Okay, so this field, psychology of men's and masculinities, have basically benefited from the foundations that has been laid down by the psychology of women. All right, and theorizing, conceptualizing, investigating the effects of gender and all these things, it all started with women. So thanks to the women psychologist over there. Now, ultimately, as a result, redefining of sex and gender led to the uh, critical analysis and development of new theories and all these aspects, and further refining these fields. Okay, and finally, the result of this was that a separate society uh, for the psychological study of men's and masculinities released their mission statement that we are creating a society, this will be the mission. Okay, this is the mission statement, and hence a separate division 51 was created in APA. So this was the interesting history. And then after all, critical studies started since 1970 when this landmark was established. Okay, and it was like during 1980s, look, like 10 years later, after the initiation of this idea, a task force was established for men's role and special interest group. Okay, these special interest groups were formed in three other divisions of APA as well. All right, and these divisions were the counseling divisions. Okay, because obviously this is the agenda of counseling. Mostly, this is the agenda of how to counsel men. Okay, so 17th, I guess 17, it is 17 division, and then 29th division, which is the psychopharmacological division. Because psychopharmacology is because the alcohol and drug abuse was quite prevalent disorder, and you will see the data and you will be easily able to support the statements. All right, so 29 division, the pharmacological division was also there, and finally the 43rd division, which was the family and marital, I suppose. Yeah, it's family, related to family. This division was also involved. Okay, so all these things were quite prominent in establishing, and then after all, the whole world began to see this initiative. And what happened that everybody started doing their researches. Many research got published in this journal. Many other journals also came into effect, and researches began to publish. Few societies was formed in UK, in Europe. You can say in Europe, in Australian psychological association, or like in Australian societies. But the question always remain, a question mark always remains in the psychology in India. All right, so this is how a brief history about psychology of men is there. Now, ultimately, I would like to show the data which I told you. So this is the data that is there on Indian men. All right, so I will show you, I will discuss only two evidences with you. Okay, the first evidence is basically the prevalence of mental disorder among gender. Okay, now this is the National Mental Health Survey of India. Okay, of this is a report of 2015 to 16 by Nimhans Bengaluru. It was this whole initiative was done by Nimhans, apna Bengaluru wala, and this thing was supported by Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India. All right, so it presents very interesting data. Besides many other, I have taken this topic. You can clearly see the prevalence of total mental disorders is quite high in men. 13.9 is quite high prevalence in general terms as well. And in females, it is also high, but compared to men, it is less. It is 7.5. You can clearly see. Similarly, like I told you, alcohol use disorder and similar drug related disorder in India, especially alcohol use disorder, is quite prevalent, and it has a prevalency of 9.1%. But in women, it is quite less, 0.5%. While only a hairline difference is there in psychotic disorders, but still, men's have backed the race in this one as well. While we are considering mood disorders and the neurosis, the females has a higher amount of prevalence, that is considerable, a higher amount of prevalence than men. But in bipolar and associated disorders, the prevalence is almost equal. Male and female prevalence is almost equal. So this is the fact, kind of supports the question that is this field important, or is there a need to discuss men's mental health? And directing on to the second data, basically this data has been taken from a research published by Kumar. This research was on the domestic violence against men in India. All right, so this was a table that they mentioned in their research. Out of 1650 males husband, they were married, around 19 were marketing and media professionals. Okay, 38% were engineers or doctor, 24% were business or self-employed people, and 15% were government job people, and 1%, around 1% was unemployed. So I am just telling you the rough figures. So this was the whole characteristic of the sample. Now they observed, interestingly, they quoted that around 25%, all these men, they face some form of physical violence. 22% of all these men face some form of verbal and emotional violence. Economic violence, which is quite prevalent in India, it was the highest of all. It was 32%. The economic violence means some form of like exploitation in terms of job. You're not getting a high salary, or some form of, some form of exploitation in financial aspect. And ultimately, sexual abuse was also quite prevalent. 17% was there, but 2% of people experience no domestic violence at all. Okay, so so चाहे वो जॉब से रिलेटेड हो, चाहे वो डोमेस्टिक यानी घर से रिलेटेड हो, the issues that are faced by Indian men is quite prevalent it is quite common. It is observable, but yet we fail to discuss. Now, acknowledging the issue that men face in day-to-day life, I would just like to show you a small example, one example of how uh, out of all other situations, there is one situation which is quite common. So I would like to show you that example. Okay. So it all starts with one thing which is known as expectations. All right. As a burden, these expectations include that men are expected to be emotionally strong. All right. Not showing their emotions in public, like crying in public, is quite uncommon. I would say this is the correct statement. Having a good job, expectations that having a good job, good degree, and man should be working. This is also quite an expectation that a society has with men. And being a house husband is also quite uncommon. Having an upper hand in a relationship is also quite this thing, what the society expects a man to have. All right. So overall, I would just say that men are expected to be a man. This is the statement which summarizes everything. Carrying this burden of expectation may lead to two situations further: expectations if fulfilled, expectations if not fulfilled. All right. So if expectations are fulfilled, then everything is fine. Okay. But if expectations are not fulfilled, then it leads to feeling of worthlessness, feeling bad in general, or feeling that I am dumb. All right. This form of shame or guilt is starts to cultivate within an individual if these expectations are not fulfilled. Sometimes shame is delivered from the outside sources as well, from external sources as well. Now, this is a one issue. There are many other issues, like while people, while men prefer to have attraction towards opposite sex, so that is also an example, that is also issue. But I am discussing an average issue in the form of model with you. Now, the reference of this is given in the textbook that I told you, Psychology of Men's and Masculinities. And this is one of the most common of all. Not only Indian men, but men across the globe experience this thing. All right. And hence, it is important for us to understand certain things. It is important for us to understand the challenges a counselor may face while counseling men. I told you since starting that men are difficult client. Generally, in compared to women, they are quite difficult client. All right, but once probed, they don't take much time to heal. Okay, they take comparatively at an average less time to heal. So these are the basic challenges a counselor may face, which is the first important agenda of this discussion. One challenge a counselor can face is that men are generally less interested in building emotional or supportive relationships. All right. A study was conducted in Britain. All right. That men's generally take, men's have generally a difficulty in recovering after a breakup from a serious relationship as compared to women. Reason being that a woman has a strong social support network available. Okay, but men's generally have a weaker social support network. That's the main reason. Now, why do they have it? Iska koi jawab nahi hai. There is no answer to this question, but this is the situation that I am discussing based on the evidence that is available. So, obviously, when they have a difficulty or they are less interested in building emotional and supportive relationships, this is because men are expected to be strong emotionally, right? So ultimately, while relying on someone else's support, emotional support, it becomes a kind of weakness. It reflects a kind of weakness. At least that is how it is perceived. Okay, so this is a kind of cognitive distortion, you can say. Another important challenge is that men are less likely to seek for help uh, for a kind of physical problem, emotional problem, or situational problem that they are going through. That is one of the biggest of all. Just like I told you, men tend to hide their weakness, because the expectations of the society are generally high and they are intact. All right. So while I have some kind of wound, physical wound, okay, I have some kind of emotional wound, all right, or any kind of situational problem is also there with me. Men generally try to hide these things. All right, there is a very less kind of group of men who generally share, but the percentage is quite low. This is a common challenge that you as a counselor may face. Next important thing are is which is one of the most common, one of the most important of all. Okay, that men are especially likely to avoid psychotherapy. Now, psychotherapy is the treatment that a man who is going through crisis uh, can help. But generally, men try to avoid psychotherapy as well, because once you get into a psychotherapy, then you have to reveal everything. And if you have to reveal everything, ultimately your weaknesses will be open. And again, when you are expected to be emotionally strong, when you are expected to be perfect, almost perfect, then ultimately psychotherapy avoidance becomes quite a common phenomena. Now, all these things are due to some important factors. All right, it includes stigma. Now, imagine the fact that India has a basic stigma of mental health. In India, we have stigma of mental health quite prevalent, and when we try to measure the stigma of only men in that sense as well, so how much will be the intensity of stigma at that point? So this stigma is quite a big concern. Other important factors include, like I told you, the like in the first point, it clearly said the social networking factors. Generally, few men are raised in a way that you have to be strong. Strong means no support. No support means independence from, you can say, peer, friend, or anybody. Such a kind of impaired social network is also there. And in some point of years in the middle, there was an age when the child rearing was in such a way that padhai karo, study instead of playing. So sports and playing generally evolve an individual's social network. It helps in developing the social network, going to gym, okay, and all these things. Okay, men's uh, preferences, having this kind of pair is dost ke saath nahi ghumna, not to go move with this friend or this man or this one. So all these things are quite an issue. And above all, institutional restrictions are quite uh, a contributing factor too over here in many male dominated settings. Like when you are going in army, there are certain recruitment procedures. Okay, men must not have knock knees. Medical criteria are there, though these criteria are very favorable, like very fine, they are okay, they are in place, they are necessity, but ultimately they are restrictions. Okay, so these things, and in certain kind of jobs as well, only women allowed. All right, only this kind of men are allowed. These kind of men, I'm not saying women, but these kind of men are allowed. So discrimination among men also in some institutions sometimes become a point of feeling, you can say, inferiority complex in an individual. But how can we help from these complex situations? How can we help an individual to falling prey to this complex situation. If we find a difficult client such as male, then ultimately we would need some effective psychotherapies or some effective approaches, you can say, in order to help in dealing with such kind of crisis. And in that sense, now I have kept the slide quite easy so that you will be able to understand. While there are certain kinds of psychotherapeutic approaches or some forms of psychotherapy available, that research have or evidence have supported the fact that these psychotherapies are quite effective, like most effective in issues while dealing with men. So there are certain approaches or schools, you can say, there are certain approaches. These approaches basically helps in understanding the core of the problem. They help in understanding where is the issue originated from. Okay, they also help in formulating counseling goals. All right, and ultimately prescribed techniques can be used for dealing with the crisis or for treating the crisis. First, and the one of the most famous approaches, psychodynamic approach. Now, without getting into too much depth, see, I will be discussing all these approaches or all these therapies in brief, not in too much detail, because therapies are not usually discussed in one session or few minutes. A therapy usually takes a lot of time. Okay? It takes many sessions in order. It involves practical uh, involvement. It involves everything: theoretical, research based, evidence based, facts, and everything. It involves practice. So I'll be just only discussing you the issues that these approaches target and how they help in dealing with the problems. All right. So the major areas of issues according to the psychodynamic approaches is the separation and disidentification of mothers. All right. This issue has been observed quite prominent because psychodynamic approaches generally focus on the developmental stages. Okay, the stages of development of personality. Okay, if during early childhood experience a trauma was there, then ultimately the individual's personality will develop in a certain way. All right, how an individual's separation and disidentification of from mother who is who gives nurturance, all right, who give nourishment, this thing is deeply wounding. It was observed, and repeated cycles of loss at a very young age also creates issues, and especially during the developmental age, according to the Freud. All right, and how an individual or how a man uses a defense mechanisms. Now, during any kind of fixation at a particular stage, leads to development of certain kind of defense mechanism. These defense mechanism can be denial. Okay, defense mechanism can be a repression, projection, sublimation, or any form of new defense mechanism that researchers have now discussed. So, how the man uses a defense mechanism to tackle with the stressful or anxious situation or a problem is major area of concern, and whether it is healthy or not, this is also very important. And how do they resolve conflict? All right, so the counselor generally understands the core issue of the problem, that during which age a conflict has remained a psychological hole, I will say. There is a psychological hole that remains, and what is the age or what is the situation or event that led to development of this psychological hole. And ultimately techniques are used, like free association technique is used. All right, free association, one of the most common technique, and it is very effective, I tell you. It is quite effective with the clients who are difficult to probe. So because men usually keep things to themselves, and they generally tend to find themselves alone in the situation. All right, they don't get easily, while in a crisis they don't get easily into a social situation. But if even if they do, there is some form of detachment from the second person in which with whom they are with. So ultimately free association is something which gives them an opportunity to reveal their unconsciousness without any form of censorship. All right, reveal their the first thing that comes to their mouth. So all these things are very important according to psychoanalytical approaches, and this thing acts like a pill or an aspirin for male clients. One of the most commonly used approach is the cognitive and cognitive behavioral approach. All right, we generally state these things not as CBT. We generally state these
We
things
will go
as a
with,
counselor as
right, the appropriate
cognitive
definition,
therapies
that I have
and
selected,
cognitive
that is
behavioral
given.
approaches. Now, ultimately, cognitive and cognitive behavioral approaches includes some form of techniques that are there. All right, there is a cognitive therapy, there is a reality therapy, there is a behavioral approach also. So there are many therapies over there. And as you can see in the icons, there are some pluses and there are negatives. All right, so there are some distorted perceptions, okay, about the reality. What reality I observe, generally human beings are very creative in stimulating the future or stimulating the possible course of situation they are going through based on their experiences or based on the present reactions they got. So it creates certain forms of cognitive distortions. All right, and then there is illogical, or you can say irrational perceptions. All right, irrational thinking is there. Irrational thinking means that thinking anything without any reason or thinking anything without any logic. You can label all these terms as incongruencies. Okay, it is easy, it becomes easier then. There are certain cognitive incongruencies in a man while he is going through a crisis. This approach observes this thing. And the correct thought congruencies are inseminated through the series of techniques, you can say, a series of activities. There are certain activities, there are certain, you can say, talk sessions. All right. So, basic cognitive schema is discovered first, that what is the actual cognitive distortion there and what are the irrational thinking that are present there, and all these incongruencies, if there is an incongruencies, they are replaced with congruent thoughts, congruent perceptions, and ultimately with the help of more healing techniques or healing homeworks, you can say uh, activities, the men generally tend to feel better. So all these minuses that are present over there are replaced with the pluses in this approach. All right. And ultimately, next approach is the interpersonal approach. As you can see, the icons are connected. So interpersonal means there the main focus is to enforce the interpersonal patterns in an individual. While uh, like the main idea behind interpersonal approach is that they don't consider that there may be an issue or there will be an issue. Their focus is here and there, and in order, sometimes a man can be hostile, like, all right, sometimes a man can be detached, he can be cold, he can be mistrusting. So all these things are there in certain situations, in certain kind of problems. These theories, which are more related to attachment theories, all right, it is more social in nature. Object relations theories and some form of cognitive and behavioral emphasis is also there. So this approach generally tend to apply the like try combination of all these theories and deliver and enforce an interpersonal pattern within an individual, which is ultimately healthy. According to Adlerian and Rudolf Draker's psychology, individual is indivisible. Okay, individual is indivisible. That means that we need social environment or interaction. Our patterns are how is what determines that we are healthy or not. So improving those interpersonal patterns generally tend to help the male client quite a lot and improve his social support network. Next is the humanistic, existential, and experiential therapies. Now, this is the approach which is very much Indian. All right. See, the humanistic, existential, and experiential therapies, or the whole approach, the umbrella of whole this approach, has been existing in India, especially in their culture since ages, since ancient Indian ages. Whether you talk about Bhagavad Gita's counseling direct, it is quite a counseling guide, I would say. All right, or any kind of principles that were associated with the भक्ति movement, इसके अंदर सूफीज्म भी आ जाता है, बहुत सारी चीजें आ जाती है. So these things were quite related. Focus area of humanistic existential and experiential uh, theories is that to understand the deeper aspect of self or psyche, all right, to understand the meaning of existence. So there is a high level understanding, and if there is any kind of psychological dilemmas, all right, while counseling, a man can have certain kind of psychological dilemma. And in terms of this whole approach, there is one thing which I generally follow. It is that confusion creates conflict, and when those confusions are removed, conflict at some point, up to some extent, is also removed. Conflict is also resolved up to some point. So ultimately, if there is any kind of psychological dilemma or discrepancy between self and all these things, meaning of myself, meaning of my existence, then these things are generally cured with the help of this approach. Mostly the clients who have a suicidal tendency, who are thinking of suicide, who are next to doing suicide or something like that, they tend to lose the meaning of their existence. That why am I here now? Because when you are in a depression or when you are in a very stressful phase, then you tend to overlook all these things physically that is available over there. You tend to overlook your strengths. You tend to overlook the reason why you are staying alive, the reason why you are doing this course or doing this job, or you are in this family. They tend to lose the meaning. So in order to realize them, make them realize the meaning.
So thank you, sir, for this in like insight uh, experiences and sharing your information. So yeah,
All right, are
so will
you?
be like joining us in 2 minutes.
Time has finished. What I didn't understand that. Shall I stop presenting?
No issue, sir. Yeah, you can carry with the
All
ahead.
right. Finally, the group therapy that I was discussing, it is the most advantageous for all groups. All right, and ultimately, whether the male is of young age or male is of older age, these group therapies are quite, uh, you can say, healing in nature. Men generally tend to stay in an isolated situation or psychological bubble, you see, and they usually are not that much social. And these sessions help male realize the universality of the problems that all men face. Okay, that they are able to relate with others, and this is very useful in getting rid of shameful uniqueness. All right, so this shameful uniqueness is something which eats away the man's psychology and creates that psychological hole. So group therapies are very useful in getting rid of these issues. And then individual is able to involve in a participatory self disclosure. So this is one of the most important agenda of the group therapy, that self disclosure, which usually meant men's try to run away from, is initiated or is start to take place, and ultimately they discover that they are not unique. Now, these were the treatments, these are the main points that a professional, a counselor should follow. But what are the techniques, some preventive techniques that can help men in general to get rid of any kind of situation or to remain healthy, so that physically and mentally healthy, so that they don't have to, they don't have to try hard during the stressful situations. Now, lastly, I would like to go on to discussing the preventions. All right. So Now, my focus is not on the mental health only. Tried to focus, it is better and it is wiser to focus on mental as well as physical health of a man. And not only a man can benefit from these things, a woman can also benefit from these things, or any other part of society, or anybody can benefit from all these things. Okay, there are some research based evidences that support these facts. Okay, and there will be some techniques that I will share you without wasting any time. First and the foremost thing is the physical exercise or sports. Due to the fact that COVID-19 has just passed, we have followed quite a sedentary lifestyle, and hence it is important that for us to go back to an active lifestyle. So just like I told you now, there was a phase in between where major focus of the parents was to study instead of playing in sports and all these things. But now things are changing because people have started to acknowledge the importance of sports. Sports helps in creating a support network or a social network. Gyms are also very helpful in creating social networks rather than building physically an individual. And exercise, these things are generally taught in physical education or in studies related to physical education. Now, my teacher generally, with evidence, taught me that when you exercise your chest or upper torso, then ultimately you are able to gather more self confidence, and individual self esteem is affected. There is a strong relation or a link between these things. When the arms are strong, when the shoulders are strong, now ultimately it helps in individual to carry the pressures of life. When the back exercise is there, ultimately individual becomes more resilient. So these links between the physical body and the psychological aspects do exist. And obviously one of the evidence that I have also quoted over here is that the intensity or the frequency or the duration of the exercise is positively related to psychological and mood related outcomes of an individual. So becoming a fit person, doing a physical exercise not to only gain muscle but to remain fit, is quite important for a man to help in dealing with any kind of crisis he will face in future. Next thing is quit addictions. Okay, now I have not included any kind of citation over here. It is quite obvious how harmful addictions are. There is no need to even discuss these things on base of evidence. Evidence is there, we have read it quite a lot. Addiction of any form of addiction creates a kind of dependency. All right, it takes away the independence of a man. Whether it is a tea, some people can't even live without a tea, or caffeine is actually their some necessity, prime necessity. So staying away from few kind of addictions, or in order, because generally tend to fill this psychological hole with their addictions. All right, and uh, whether it is alcohol, whether it is any form of psychoactive drug. And now in the new age, the addictions have also crossed like up to internet addiction, social media addiction, where it is and pornographic addiction is also there, and addiction to sex is also there. All these things, addictions create a dependency, which is a weakness, a kind of weakness. So in order to get rid of that weakness, in order to remain healthy and without any dependence, quitting addictions is very important. Next thing is a healthy diet. We Indians are blessed with world's tastiest food, even if whether it is vegetarian. Okay, so a healthy diet is very important. And ultimately वो कहते हैं ना कि दिमाग का रास्ता पेट से होते हुए जाता है. So this is a हिंदी कहावत. Okay, और हिंदी से. So ultimately some patterns, dietary patterns and a quality is potentially important for mental health in early lifespan. The food you eat, the healthy food you eat today, in your young age, or in your very younger age, is generally tend to have positive links with the health in future. So eating a healthy food is quite important. Natural serotonin supplements like dairy products are quite important. All right, that's the reason why India is the largest producer of milk. There is a reason, big reason behind that. All right, and ultimately, mm, eating a form of glucose, a simple sugar or glucose, is quite effective for brain functioning. So those scholar, research scholar, if they are any, or any scientist is there, or anybody who is attending this session, sugar, sweets, and all these things, releasing of good hormone, feel good hormones, or neurotransmitter, oxytocin, is somehow have a link. So eating a healthy diet, a good diet, a self-fulfilling diet is um, very important for you. We Indians are also blessed with these things, all right, these basic values. Altruism, which they call in West, has been existing in India since ages, since Bhakti movement, and even before that. All right, Seva is something which we generally tend to indulge into. Some, not only the formal form of volunteering. Okay, you can just do few things. You can just indulge in few practices, like you can wash your own utensils after eating food. All right, at least one utensil you can wash, so that somebody who will be eating in that utensil tomorrow will find it as clean as possible. All right, you can help in planting trees. You can help in watering the plants that are there in your house or that are there in your society. All right, helping somebody without any condition is very important, and the links do exist with happiness and well-being and a positive health. So these things inculcate positive psychosocial traits within a man, and ultimately you are able to become more healthy and more resilient and more capable with all these things, because all the positive psychosocial traits have some form of impact on resilience. And when you are more resilient, ultimately you are able to overcome any or improve from any stressful situation, or sometimes you are able to resist as well. Finally, the most important of all is the Ashtanga Yoga. Now, you might be wondering the fact that Ashtanga Yoga is something which everybody says, okay, but how will we practice? Ashtanga Yoga can be practiced once you learn the whole yoga. There are different forms of yoga. Okay, it is not called yoga. Yoga asana is the one which they teach you the postures, that is only known as yoga asana. And Ashtanga Yoga is the 8 elements of yoga that is there, which uh, involves series of external and internal discipline and spiritual and like development. All right, so there are certain external discipline, like non-stealing behavior is there, okay, practicing, and non-violence is there. These are yamas. There are few more under this. There are certain then niyamas or internal disciplines, okay, feeling contented, all right, and feeling non-greedy, okay, and devotion towards God is also there in this niyama, or the ishwar parinidhan is also in there. So these are the internal disciplines, and there are some external disciplines, and then comes the posture as well. All right, postures are there which they teach you outside. Postures are something which is very important for your joints health, physical health. Also, it helps you in developing, gathering more spiritual energy or positive energy within you, within yourself. And then comes the breathe control or pranayam. Basically, some form of breathe control have found to be linked with increased neurogeneration. All right, so exercising some uh, having some breathe exercises generally tend to increase some form of neuro regeneration. And ultimately, it has also the links with the young cellular age also exist with the form of breathe control. All right, so it helps overall physically too. And then pratyahara, withdrawal of senses, like I told you previously, quit all the addictions. Quitting addictions and withdrawal of senses, so that you don't have any dependency or any weakness, is also becomes an important factor of development in this yoga, ashtanga yoga. And then concentration, dharana, is known as concentration. Okay, dharana is not perspective here, it is concentration, having a focus. Okay, when you are focused, you attain mental stability. Okay, that means वो कहते हैं ना, युधिष्ठिर, मतलब युद्ध में भी स्थिर रहने वाला, to remain calm even in the stressful situation. That is the main goal of dharana, to develop. And there are certain exercises Bindu Tratak or Tratak Kriya is the exercise under which there are certain forms of exercise, small exercises, and one of the most beginner one is the Bindu Tratak, or it is also known as the dot gazing. Okay, you sit, you have a dot, a paper with a dot in it in front of you, and you sit 3 to 4 feet uh, in front of it, and then you gaze the dot. All right, and then when the tears come off, you wipe the tears and take a little break, and then again gaze. And this is generally done 4 times. All right, so this also develops the Trata Kriya is also there, but concentration is the prime goal of Ashtanga Yoga too. And then comes Dhyan, the meditative absorption. Now you have developed yourself mentally and physically. Now it's time to develop yourself spiritually. So meditative absorptions help you in balancing the spiritual health or the spirituality within you, and it ultimately leads to the samadhi, which involves attaining the higher level of self actualization, combinations of self actualization and self transcendence. Self transcendence is a higher one stage higher than the self actualization. Maslow's hierarchy of need has been updated since then. So attaining those form is ultimately the samadhi, the union or the integration. And actually samadhi cannot be defined easily with the western theories or compared with the western theory. So you can clearly observe Ashtanga Yoga is a full form of development, wholesome individual development. And this wheel that you see is basically Dharma Chakra. Okay, is the wheel of Dharma. Why? Because Ashtanga Yoga's development creates Dharma or Dharmic individual. All right, so that is how. And okay, so people may believe that this is a pseudoscience. Okay, but ultimately the evidence do exist that people who were highly involved in yoga had a significant increase in mindfulness and spiritual well-being, and they also had lower psychiatric symptoms. And significance, if you see, it is quite strong significance. Generally significance is stated as 0.05, which is 95%, but here it is 99%, which is quite high in comparison to those who marginally followed or like moderately followed yoga, or who were involved in gymnastics. All right, so Ashtanga Yoga has been proven to be beneficial, but ultimately we cannot follow all these 8 elements because yoga means lifestyle. Yoga is lifestyle. So even except for samadhi, even if we follow any one of the elements and practice this element in our day to day life once in a while also, even then we are able to inculcate positive psychosocial traits within us. We are able to develop physical or mental or spiritual strengths, and we are able to stay strong in any kind of crisis. And finally, my last living note will be that Purusha and Prakriti, these are the two things. I'll be quite indulging Indian psychology over here. Purush and Prakriti are the two major elements of universe. They must always remain healthy. Men or women, anybody, they must remain healthy because together they can give life. Together they give life. So that's how the whole thing of discussion would end, I would say. And I would like to thank all the audience for paying attention to this session. And ultimately, thank you so much. And thank you.
Uh, thank you so much, sir. And sir, secondly, like we'll just start with the question answers round. Firstly, sir, in the first data, you have talked about the economic violence, which has increased in many, like in many recent years, right? So, sir, basically that was supported by National Mental Health Survey of India, Nimhans, Bangalore. So, sir, like, what do you think that economic violence must be cured? I mean, that the industrial disputes or basically the grievances that are formed for employees that needs to be carry forward.
All right. So thank you for the question. Basically, I presented two data. One was of domestic violence. Actually, I would correct that. That was a domestic violence, and one of that form was the economic violence, and other was the Nimhans. Nimhans were totally discussing the distinction between male and female mental health. But yeah, Your question is very important, but there should be some form of uh, industrial initiatives. Now, the data which I presented was a form of domestic violence, yani in house with relatives or anybody, the problems that a man face. But it is true that economic violence do exist over in the industry, because in India, the labor, despite labor laws are there, the focus on productivity is so much high that employees well-being is generally ignored. So ultimately these things lead to cheaper labor in India. That's the reason of being labor being cheaper in India. And there are many more variables, so I can't get into those discussions. But yeah, it is very important for organization to reformulate the economic violence that is going on in the industries or in the organization, because that is the main reason of brain drain, that why people go in foreign countries to study, in foreign countries to provide services. All right, I hope I was able to answer your question. If not, then you can just
Sir,
repeat, I can
also,
answer precisely.
yeah, sir. Yes, sir. Like that was well convincing, sir. And the second question that was from the audience was that there was many treatments that you have talked about as well, the psychodynamic approaches, existential, then many approaches, right? So, sir, like basically, how you can convince a man to go and just take those treatments, because as we know that the upbringing of a man is always that you should not discuss the problems or weaknesses to other people. So how these treatments, like these treatment must be like important and must be useful as well, but then how you can convince that man to take those treatments?
Yeah, so this is the very important question that frequently I receive, that how do we start? Okay, and even in Shiv Granth, it is written that the first step to resolve any kind of conflict is acceptance. All right. So a client generally tends to go to a psychotherapeutic practice or a place only, only and only when they accept that they are in a problem. Okay, so the first step is to convince them somehow, because generally the thing is, like I told you, there is a psychological bubble. So breaking that bubble is very important in order to realize, make them realize the water that is flowing from that bubble can fill the whole room. See, this is the biggest bubble you were living into. So convincing the client that you have a problem, but not forcefully convincing. Ultimately there may be some situations in which a male client may feel that they are normal despite of the problem, and we may personally observe it as a problem, like attraction towards opposite sex. Some people observe it as a problem, but for some it is not. So we cannot convince that person to go to therapies or take. All right, it is their personal preference. So it depends, firstly depends upon the problem that is there and whether that problem is actually a problem or not. And then ultimately getting them to a clinician or a counselor is that making them realize or acknowledge the fact, or convincing them that this is a problem. And then ultimately they are convinced. When they are convinced, then they are able to find themselves in a pool from which they cannot climb out, or they cannot swim out. And then is the step when they seek for help. This is the general research based trend, observed trend that is there everywhere. And when once they are within the session, once initial session with the counselor, it becomes the duty of the counselor to sustain that client. All right, and it also then depends upon the creativity of the counselor to involve all these psychoanalytical approaches to apply them wisely and use them to develop rapport, to establish rapport, which is the first stage, and then ultimately go on dealing with the task.
Thank you so much, sir, for delivering your like viewpoints on this topic, and that was the really lovely session, sir. I would like to extend my warm gratitude to you, sir. And I personally learned a
Thank
lot
you.
of things on this topic, because this is the topic that is not generally taken up and not talked about. So, and
Yeah.
also, I think that people who are there on live have also enlightened their knowledge on this topic, sir. So, lastly,
Thank you
I
so
would
much,
like to
Tanya.
thank Psychologs Magazine as well, and also the chief editor, Dr. Arvind Ota, and also the designing team. Like without them, their event won't be possible, sir. So, yeah,
Thank you so much, everybody. And
thank you
it
so
was
much, sir, for
really a
joining the
lovely
session.
initiative by the Psychologs Magazine. Thank you so much.